Hey guys, Wilson from On the Mewve here with another install video for you. And this one is really cool. I'm excited about doing this because it's going to extend my range of ability to not have to refill all the time. So what I've purchased is a RDS auxiliary diesel tank and combo toolbox. So this one's pretty cool. I'll put the link below so you guys can see which one I purchased. But I like this option. I've got a toolbox in the top, and I've got a 60-gallon diesel auxiliary tank right here that I'm going to put into the bed of the truck. It's going to fit right in front of my fifth wheel hitch, and it takes care of a couple of my needs. The Ford F-350 has a 35-gallon tank, and right now the range just is not far enough for me. I like to drive a little bit further than the range it gives me. With the addition of this tank, and this tank is 60 gallons, that should give me a range of almost 1,000 miles. Now, I know I'm not going to drive that straight. It prevents me from having to stop and pay higher prices for diesel along the trip route, and I can pick and choose where I want to go. We all know truck stops charge a good bit more for diesel, and so if I can unhitch when I get to my location, usually I can find somewhere else to buy diesel a little bit cheaper. So, we're going to show you how to install this. Should be pretty simple. If you have just a few skills, you can do this. All right, so we're going to start with a little materials list right here, and this is not necessarily an all-inclusive thing, but these are the main things that I decided to purchase along with the auxiliary tank and toolbox. So I bought some neoprene, which I'm going to use as my insulator between the bed and the bottom of the auxiliary tank. That way to take some of the vibration out. I went with a 3/8 inch thick. You can go thicker. Depends on your bed and how it's set up. I decided to get some of these plastic snap rings which will fit into the bed when I drill holes into the bed, so my tube, my fuel line, will go through these and they won't get cut. Shut-off valves, connectors for the fuel line. These are 3/8 inch in size. A couple of elbows because the auxiliary tank is going to have a tight fit where your connector comes out on the driver's side, which is where it's going to hook into the fuel line. So I went ahead and went with a solenoid that's usually off, so that's going to stop the flow of the fuel so it just won't continuously flow. I bought a small electric fuel pump, so I'll wire these together so they'll cut on, and this pump will push the fuel into the tank. These are, you can find different ones. This one here is about a 20-gallon per hour fuel pump. This particular one I got from Amazon. It actually came with a filter and with hose clamps. I need some fuel line. This is 5/16 inch fuel line. It also came with hose clamps. I bought a few extra hose clamps. I may not need any of these after these showed up as they did. And my final part of the installation is my diesel fuel line splice. So this is going to be spliced into my filler neck, which is on the truck. And you can buy these parts yourself, but this one part is the most important part. This is your rollover protective valve. It has a ball in it, and if you happen to have an accident, and this is a safety deal on why these are required, if you have an accident and you were to roll over, if you didn't have this fitting, 60 gallons of diesel fuel could leak out onto the road or wherever you are. This particular fitting, if you roll over, there's a ball inside of the fitting, and if you rolled over, the ball will actually sink down and prevent fuel from coming into or leaking out of the tank and onto the ground. So I really hated to spend the money on this particular kit because really it's just a little hose, a fitting, extra hose, clamps, and these are things that you could buy easily from a hardware store, a lot cheaper, but this one valve is hard to come by, so you have to typically get this in the kit. And you can find these on eBay or Amazon. I purchased everything I needed for this installation on either eBay or Amazon, and I'll put links below to the items that I'm using for this install.
So my recommendation is to do a dry fit on everything you do before you start this project. I've already done my dry fit. I put my box at the front of the cab. I made sure that everything lined up correctly. I made sure that my tabs lined up correctly. And I'm gonna have to come back and I'll have to drill holes, mounting holes here, because these will go through the bed and the bolts will secure this tank to the bed. We wanna make sure that's done properly. But I've already pre-measured, so I know exactly what I'm gonna do when it comes to drilling these. My next step is I'm gonna remove this filler, or this connection here. So I'll loosen it up. I'd be careful, try to keep any contaminants from getting into your tank. Okay, we've taken our plug out, and what we're gonna do is we're going to replace that plug with one of these elbows. The elbow is necessary for my installation, and I would imagine many vehicles require this because it is a pretty tight fit on that driver's side. So this is going to go here, okay, and we're going to put some tape on here and make sure that everything's good. You can use some putty type leak preventer, whatever works for you. I'm going to use tape because I've had good luck with tape like this in the past. So I put about 4 layers of tape here. I want to make sure I have a good seal once I put this in. I don't want any leaks in the bed, so I'll make sure I go back and I test this as well later. All right, so we're pretty tight there. We've got a good seal all the way around, and again, we'll double check it here before we do all of our final install stuff. So our next step is we're gonna cut a piece of hose here. I need a fair amount, so about 12 inches here. That way I've got some to work with. I'm gonna have to make connections, but I only have a certain distance here of about 20 inches to work within, because then I'm gonna run into my wheel well, and I really don't want to attach anything to the wheel well if I can avoid that. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a cut at about a foot. I can always trim this up later. Now we're going to take our hose clamps. We're going to make sure that the screw side is facing back toward us. That way I'm going to be able to easily tighten this down in a second. There we go, nice and tight. And plus, I decided to change my angle just a little bit because as I was thinking, if I have to reach down in through here, I'm not gonna have a lot of room. If I need to make an emergency repair on here, I can reach in and I can angle right here. So you might wanna think about that as you install. We've already put some tape onto our fittings. We wanna make sure that we don't have any leaks, if at all possible, because diesel fuel leaking is not a good thing going down the road. Definitely don't want them in bed. So what we're going to do is we're going to find our solenoid. We're going to look at the arrow on the bottom of the solenoid, and that tells us our flow. So we want to make sure that this is going to be turned in this direction. We are going to put, and actually you do have to think about this because this lever has to be able to cut a certain way in order to cut this on and off. Okay? So this right here is not exactly going to work. So we're going to have to reverse this. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to install my valve, okay, onto this fitting. That way I can shut this off before it gets to the solenoid if I ever have an issue. And this is a manual shut-off switch. I highly recommend that you put this into your system. So we will tighten this up as best as we can. So now I'm going to slide my hose clamp onto my fuel hose. I'm going to install this fitting, and I decided to install it vertically so I can easily reach into the bed. I can pull it up to shut off the flow, pull down to allow the flow to happen. So our next step in this process is going to be install our solenoid valve. This is a closed valve, so if there's no power to it, it automatically closes the valve and it keeps any fuel from coming through. So I can leave this manual valve open and I don't really have to worry about this leaking at all. When I wire this up, I'm going to wire it to my upfitter switch and I'll be able to cut it on, and I'll cut on the fuel pump and the solenoid at the same time. Both will engage, pumping the fuel directly to the tank. I need to also install a connector to my opposite side of the solenoid, so I'm going to install the exact same connection, 5/16 inch hose, so I can put in a fuel filter just before my fuel pump. I do think this is an important step. If you put an inline fuel filter here, it's going to prevent trash or anything that could have gotten into your fuel. Now, I'm good. I've got 2 fuel filters on my truck. So the Ford F350s, 250s, they have 2 filters already, but I want to still try to keep any trash out of that fuel system if at all possible. We don't want that to get into a fuel pump or anything else. So I think this is cheap insurance. These are really cheap. You can replace them easily, just pop them in and out, but you do have to go ahead and figure to put this in line with your system. All right, so we have installed our fuel filter here. So we've got a short piece of hose from our solenoid to the fuel filter, another short piece of hose, which we're gonna connect directly to our fuel pump. Now we wanna make sure that this is correctly in line, and on almost every fuel pump, I think everyone has this, there's an arrow. That arrow is going to point to the direction that the fuel is going to be pushed to. So we want the fuel pushed from the tank to our filler neck, which is going to be underneath the truck. So we're going to go ahead and add this, and we'll tighten down our hose clamp just like we've done everything else. And once we do this, we'll be ready to make some other connections underneath the truck, and also we'll be ready to mount our tank into the bed. All right, so our fuel tank toolbox combo is actually going to come with a couple extra things. It's going to have some mounting bolts and some springs that come with it. These are what you're supposed to use in order to secure this to the bed of the truck, and that is a necessary step so it's not sliding around. It also comes with some foam. This foam is actually single-sided sticky, so this is going to be laid into the bed where your grooves are. That's going to make sure that you have a solid surface, and then on top of that, I'm going to lay this rubber or neoprene down below that. I'm going to slice this in half, and I'm going to put half on the front, half towards the back, and that's going to create a barrier from vibration. I've been with other people who have auxiliary tanks, and I've heard a vibration in the back of the truck, and it's just loud noise that you don't really need. So I'm going to do whatever I can to avoid having that noise in the bed of the truck. So our next step, before I get this to my mounting location in the truck at the front of the bed, is I want to go ahead and drill my holes into these mounting pieces. So if you look close here, you're going to have a L-shaped bracket which is mounted, it's welded to our fuel tank. And so what I've done is I've made a quick mark right here, and I'm going to drill this all the way through so I will be able to put my my bolt here, which should be 5/16 into here, and mount it into the bed. So I've got my 5/16 inch drill bit, and I'm going to go ahead and drill this out. So this is just aluminum, so pretty easy to drill through. Now we're going to repeat that process all the way around. There's 3 tabs that we're going to have to drill through. So what I decided to do is not place my entire rig on the inside of the bed. I decided to make myself a little bracket. I had a couple of metal parts laying around, and so I've taken a little channel, I've taken a couple brackets, and I've mounted my solenoid, filter, and my fuel pump here together in line. I'm going to then mount this underneath the bed of the truck, and then I'm going to run my hose directly from the tank down to this point here where I have my shutoff valve. So easy access to my manual shutoff. Now my next step is to mount this underneath the truck, and then I'm going to also place a wire from my upfitter switch under the hood directly to my positive wire, which I've rigged to my fuel pump and my solenoid. That way they'll turn on at the same time and I can have flowing fuel easily. Alright, so my next step here is the toolbox combo, auxiliary tank combo here came with some strips of foam. So this strip of foam is going to go in between our ribs in the bed of the truck. So I'm going to go ahead and lay this down, and then on top of that, to stop vibration between the auxiliary tank and the bed of the truck, I'm going to lay a layer of neoprene down. This is 3/8 inch neoprene. It's pretty soft, it's flexible, it should last, it's waterproof, and that's going to hopefully dampen any vibration that happens as we drive down the road. We have cut our roll in half of the thicker neoprene, and now we're going to install the tank on top of this these two sheets of neoprene to eliminate noise, vibration, and sliding around. All right, so our next step here, we are going to bolt our auxiliary tank to the bed of the truck. I'm not going to bore you with all the drilling and everything that we go through, but we drill 3 holes in our tabs. We go through the bed, and now we're going to insert this bolt. It's going to have a washer. We're going to insert that. Then there'll be another washer, a spring, another washer, and then a lock nut. And what this spring does is it allows flexibility between the bed and the tank, and that spring's pretty stiff, but that's going to keep our auxiliary tank from vibrating too much and causing extra wear and tear on the bed, and possibly ripping this bolt through the bed, which would be catastrophic if you had something bad happen. So now we've got our toolbox auxiliary combo bolted down to the bed. We are ready now to put our fuel hose on the auxiliary tank. We're going to install the fuel hose. So I've already put a clamp, hose clamp here. We're going to install that onto the fitting, or 5/16 inch fitting that comes out of the bottom of the tank. I've pre-drilled a hole into the bed, and we'll zoom in and show you that hole. And so one of the things I did was I bought these bushings, really cheap bushings. You can, just plastic bushings. They fit into the hole and they lock into place. They have a little lock mechanism there. You can buy rubber bushings or whatever you'd like to. These work perfect for me. So now we're under the truck, and we're going to go ahead and mount our solenoid, filter, and our pump. There just happened to be a bolt over here that I could use as kind of a guide. So I'm going to place that there. It'll help me hold it into place while I screw this into place. And there's 2. Nice and sturdy, and that's not going to have any problem staying in place. So one of our last steps here is going to be hooking up this fuel line onto our connector here. We're going to work that into there. We've tie strapped our fuel line to my bracket, so there's nothing that's going to move around. And now we're going to put this hose clamp connecting our fuel line from the auxiliary tank to the solenoid. Our next step is going to be to connect a fuel line to our fuel pump, and then we will connect that fuel line to our T adapter, which we will tap into the filler neck. So our next step is to pry this cover plate off. It's got a couple of tabs over here on the side, so we want to be careful. I've got it loose. Pry it right off. Then we're going to remove the bolts that hold in the filler neck for the diesel, and then underneath there will be bolts that hold in the DEF filler neck. Now we have our diesel filler neck loose. And then we'll go on the underside and we will remove these bolts. We'll also have to go underneath and we'll have to undo some hose clamps that actually hold these filler necks onto the tank itself. So these clamps are kind of a booger to get to because they're up between the bed and the filler neck. I've already got the vent clamp off or loose, so that one's good, and now I'm gonna have to work on the clamp that holds the actual diesel fuel filler neck on. So here's a little tip. This is F350, real tight in here, and so what I've done, I could not get to the diesel fuel side here, the clamp, the hose clamp, so I went ahead and pulled it out and back, and now I can bend it down just a little bit because this is metal piping here and there's just no flex. All right, so we've got our filler neck off. It is all metal, as I said earlier, and now we're gonna have to make some measurements to cut. You'll have to figure out what works best for you. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna insert this directly into the fuel line that goes to the tank. So I'm actually gonna replace this end with this piece. Then I'm going to cut right here. I've made my mark, so I'm just gonna cut this completely off, and then I will be able to put our rubber hose connector over both, tighten the clamps down, and I'll have a nice tight connection. Got to make sure this is right, because if it's not right, then we're going to be leaking diesel fuel, and that will not be good. So I've made my cut with the Sawzall here. You can use whatever you want to cut yours with. I made a pretty clean cut with the Sawzall, had a metal blade. Now I'm just making sure I don't have any residue inside there. So had a little bit of yellow paint inside, and want to make sure I get rid of that. Got a pretty smooth edge, so I think we're good to go. So we are going to insert, and I've got to remember this is up, so I've got to mount it back in the correct position. I need to get to my hose clamps from underneath, so I'm going to slide this end over my filler neck end. Now I'm going to insert my T. I've already placed the roller ball valve here. This is the roll over valve. So if your truck happens to roll over in an accident, when this rolls over, the ball falls and it cannot leak fuel. Okay, so safety measure needs to be in place. Going to insert this here. It must be vertical, so you need to make sure that it's vertical. If you don't, you're going to get that ball falling, and then you're not going to be able to fill the truck with fuel like you need to from your tank. So now we've made our connections here. We've got these hose clamps tightened down. We have our rollover valve in the position that I want it to be in. Everything's tight. Now we're going to reinstall this into our fuel line. Our fuel vent is right here, so we'll reattach those, tighten it down, and then we'll be ready for our last little part of our install. All right, guys, I'm short. Okay, I got short arms. They're like T-Rex arms, okay? So I'm gonna take and make myself, out of this pallet that my toolbox came on, something raised so I can get to everything. Hashtag short people problems.
If you know, you know.
Yes, you did. So I've made all my connections underneath. I've got my T-fitting in. My rollover valve is vertical. Now I just need to reinstall this filler neck, screw it back down. Now I can make my connection to the rollover valve. So we've run this electrical line from the front of the truck all the way down to our mounted unit. We have wired up, made the positive connection here, the power wire, to our fuel pump. Now our last step is to connect the fuel line from the fuel pump to our filler neck. I went ahead before I put the filler neck back into place because that is a real booger to put into place. You better make sure you have this fuel line connected to that T, or else you'll never get it in there. So that's my tip. Make sure this fuel line is connected to the T before you reinstall your filler neck. Now we're going to reinstall our filler neck by just installing these 3 bolts back into place. Now we're going to reinstall our cover here. This just snaps into place. Nothing difficult about it. Has a little gasket around each side. And then we're going to put our DEF screw cap on. Fuel cap back on. That part is done. The last thing I have to do is now wire up to my upfitter switch, make the connection. I'm going to connect it to upfitter switch number 3, which I have 5 in this Ford, and that'll make it nice and easy to turn my pump on from inside the cab. So we're going to go to our relay switch number 3, or upfitter switch number 3. I'm going to go ahead and strip this wire. It is the blue and the green. You just need to double check and make sure that you have the right ones. Twist our wires. Going to cut and strip our red wire. That's going to go to our power on the fuel pump. And now we are going to put these together with a wire connector. I like the connectors from Amazon. You can get these a couple different places, but they're heat shrink wrap, and it has solder right in the center, so everything's together. Plus these red pieces come down to the wire and they make it waterproof. Gonna use our torch. I've got an airline right here, so I need to be real careful with that. So I'm gonna kind of aim back towards the window, and we'll get this connected. This solder doesn't take a whole lot of heat to melt. And the heat shrink will go right down. After the installation process, I'm very pleased with the performance of the RDS 60-gallon tank. Now, you don't get 60 gallons in the tank, I have found out, so I think I'm around 52, 53 gallons is about the max I can get into the tank. So I'm not sure how they calculated that. Maybe that was minus the space for the toolbox. I like being able to have my tools in the truck, but unfortunately I have a short bed truck, which makes that kind of prohibitive if I'm going to put a tank in the bed. So I can't have my normal toolbox. This is the next best thing. I've got storage room for all the major tools I need in case I need a repair on the road while we're camping, and I've got extra diesel fuel. I'm real happy with the way the system turned out. we've been able to go about 900 plus miles in range, and we did that this summer as we were traveling up to Michigan, and actually on the way back we kind of long hauled it on the way back and traveled about 10 or 11 hours one day. Yeah, that was a lot, but we were ready to get home after our big vacation. So overall, I would give this RDS tank a really high rating. I recommend it. The installation process, my tips would be to pre-plan everything, dry fit all of your parts to make sure you have everything and everything's ready before you get started. It took me about 2 afternoons to do the installation. Had some drilling to do, so you got to have a few basic tools with you, but great process. There is one thing I would like to change if I could go back, and I will make this change eventually. Instead of the plastic grommets that I showed you in the installation video, I would use a rubber type grommet, and I'm going to go back and actually change those out eventually, because I do think the rubber grommet will stay in place a lot longer. So I hope you guys enjoyed the installation video. Give us a big thumbs up if this helped you guys out, and if you're contemplating getting one of these tanks, do it. It's going to save you from having to stop at a lot of different locations, and you're going to be able to go that extra mile and not have to worry about fuel, especially when you're traveling out west like we plan to do next summer. So we'll see you guys next time out on the Mewve.